We're continuing our discussion about market failures and the role of government, and we are moving on to the second form of market failure, which is an externality. So to start off, we're just going to present some pretty basic information. We've always looked at this curve and said that that's a demand curve, right? You should have looked at that and said that's a demand curve. Well, all of a sudden it's labeled something else, MPB, and that stands for marginal private benefit. So the demand curve has always been also something called the marginal benefit curve. Noticing that at lower prices, the marginal benefit of buying an additional item is greater, and at higher prices it's going to be less. And private is because we're mostly talking about private markets. In the same respect, while this we've called in the past the supply curve, we could also call it the marginal private cost curve. Again, at higher prices, the marginal cost of creating something is higher, and at lower prices it's lower. So here we have a supply and demand graph, and we also see that it's also a marginal private benefit curve and a marginal private cost curve. So for this instance, when we're talking about market failures, we're going to be thinking about things in terms of marginal benefit and marginal cost. So let's talk about externalities. What is an externality? An externality is a third-person side effect. So, for example, there could be, whenever there's a transaction between two people, whenever there's an external benefit or an external cost to someone else, we say that there's an externality. So here are some examples. Let's take, for example, smoking cigarettes. What is the interaction? What is the market interaction there? The market interaction is between the consumer and the cigarette company who they purchase the cigarettes from. But who else is affected? Well, if you're smoking in a restaurant or on an airplane or somewhere else, there's lots of other people that get secondhand smoke. And so there's an external person that is affected by that transaction. So when the free market fails to include these external costs or external benefits, we say that there's an externality. And without any government involvement, there would be too much of some goods and too little of others. So, for example, the free market assumes that the cost of smoking is fully paid by the people who smoke. But the government quickly realizes that there are extra external costs and makes policies to limit smoking. So think, for example, you cannot smoke on planes anymore, right? You used to be able to smoke in certain sections of the plane. Then they realized that that didn't make any sense because the air goes everywhere. Now you can't smoke at all. And the government is also taxing cigarettes to decrease the amount of people who are actually smoking. So there are both negative externalities and positive externalities. So we already talked about secondhand smoke, but what are some other products that have negative externalities? Well, pollution is a negative externality. Loud barking dogs while you're trying to sleep could be an externality, and definitely an oil spill like the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico has a negative externality, right? So sometimes we call those spillover costs because they're not calculated by the original market. So it's a situation that results in a cost for a different person than the original decision maker, and the costs spill over to other people or society. So let's take an example. Let's take Zoram, which is a chemical company that pollutes the air when it produces its good. Zoram is really only looking at its internal costs, right? Its marginal costs, its fixed costs, its variable costs, and they're trying to be profitable when calculating those costs. They ignore the social cost of pollution. They don't calculate it into their models. They don't pay for it, and that's it. So the firm's marginal cost curve is its supply curve. And however, when you factor in the external cause, Zoram is producing too much of its product. So let's see what that looks like in a graph. The government recognizes this and limits production. So even though we were talking about Zoram, let's take the same idea and let's look at cigarettes. So the cigarette company is done its marginal private costs, and that supply curve is its marginal cost curve. And we're going to assume that everybody that wants cigarettes along the demand curve, that there's no additional benefits to cigarettes, so it's also the marginal social benefit. But at that price, at this quantity of the free market, we think that there are too many cigarettes being produced, because this supply curve does not calculate in the costs of secondhand smoke. It doesn't calculate in the cost of people getting cancer due to secondhand smoke. It doesn't calculate the cost of people's clothes smelling bad after they go out to a bar, or all of any additional cost to society. It doesn't calculate that in when the person goes to the counter and pays $5 for a pack of cigarettes. So what is the cost? Well, what will it look like when the external costs are factored in? Obviously, the marginal cost will be significantly higher, okay? And we call that the marginal social cost. This is the true cost to society, right? So if you were going to include all of those costs, you would have a much higher price. Oops, sorry, let me go back for just a second. Let me show you with the cursor. You would have a much higher price and less quantity would be produced if society, if it was allocated correct for society. So at this free market price right here, quantity free market, the marginal social cost is greater than the marginal social benefit, and so too much is being produced. Another way of thinking about that is by adding that line in here, okay? And what you notice here is that there is actually too much being produced at the free market level. And if you notice this little triangle, it's in a different place than we've learned it before, but this is the deadweight loss, okay? And so this is the true social equilibrium, optimal in a perfect world where marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. And there's that over allocation. So let's come back to this again. And what should the government do to fix this negative externality? Well, what does this look like? It should look like something we've seen before in this course. And if you think about it, it looks like a tax. And so what you do is, if you want to get this price up to the price that is socially optimal and less quantity, then you tax cigarettes. So the solution is to tax the amount of the externality per unit, per pack of cigarettes. So let's say you put a 50-cent tax on cigarettes and it moves it to the optimal position, okay? And now the marginal social cost equals the marginal private cost, and we have a more efficient market. So this actually did happen. To give you some real life examples. Prop 99 in California added a 25-cent tax to a pack of cigarettes, and you can see that the amount of smoking in California decreased from 1984 to 2010. An additional tax was levied in 2007. And they even tried to add more taxes in I think that's 2006, $2.60 per pack of cigarettes, which did not pass. This is just a little activity for you to try on your own. The Stockholm traffic video is in your soft chalk. It's just loaded underneath this video. Skip through that. So now let's talk for just a minute about positive externalities. Just like with negative externalities, you can have things where there are external benefits. Vaccines, public education, people expanding and improving their houses in your neighborhood will have additional benefits. So these are called spillover benefits, and this is whenever there's a benefit for someone who is not the original decision maker, and the benefits spill over to other people. So, for example, a mom decides to get a flu vaccine for her child. She's not thinking about everyone else in the class or everyone else in her neighborhood. She's thinking about the internal benefits for her family and her own child, that her child's not going to get sick. But there's an additional benefit to us as the society because this is one less person that we're going to be catching the flu from. So her private marginal benefit is her demand, but when you factor in external benefits, the demand would be greater. So let's see what that looks like on a graph. The government recognizes this and subsidizes flu shots, and it's something that we call the herd effect. So let's take this basic idea again. We have the marginal social cost, and the supply curve is already established from the pharmaceutical company. And there's that mom's marginal private benefit. The marginal private benefit doesn't include the additional benefits to society. What would that look like? Well, if you factor in the external benefits, then the quantity of flu shots supplied would be much greater. So it looks like this. The demand for the marginal social benefit will be significantly higher than that for the marginal private benefit because there's all of these additional benefits which we discussed. Now, if you look at this, when you increase the demand for something because you think that it should be supplied at a larger quantity, the price also increases. So what has to happen here? Well, the government has to come in and supply a subsidy to get that quantity higher for flu shots. Okay? So if the market produces Q free market right here, why is it a market failure? It's a market failure because they are not providing enough of this good that provides all these extra benefits. Okay? So you can see, let's go back, you can see that at this free market price and quantity, the benefit is actually significantly higher, which means that there is deadweight loss in this market at the old free market. Now it's in a different place, and what happens is, if we come back, the marginal social cost is less than the marginal social benefit, so too little is being produced, and there's an underallocation. So what should the government do to fix a negative externality? Well, we've already said that they should subsidize it, but if you notice, at this free market, there's this deadweight loss. Okay? By subsidizing it, by subsidizing the amount of the externality, you remove the deadweight loss. So it's kind of interesting because before we talked about taxes creating deadweight loss, and now we're talking about taxes and subsidies getting rid of the deadweight loss. And that is why it's a market failure, because at the free market, there's already the deadweight loss calculated in, and now we're removing it by giving a subsidy or by taxing a pack of cigarettes. So, what do we know occurs whenever there's overproduction or underproduction of a good in a market? Deadweight loss. And so we're just going to show you really quick with the last 30 seconds that in this particular case, where this is that market for cigarettes again, the deadweight loss is going to be right there. And in this particular case, the deadweight loss exists before the tax is imposed. And by putting the tax in, you actually get rid of the deadweight loss and it goes away. Okay, we're going to end there.